Lesson planning is something every teacher does, but how often does it actually feel manageable, meaningful, and worth the time that it takes? It's easy to get stuck in the cycle of over planning, scrambling last minute, or feeling like you have to create everything from scratch. Today, we're unpacking practical ways to streamline your planning, stay grounded in your goals, and make the most of the resources you already have. That's all coming up on this episode of Some Shenanigans. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Some Shenanigans, a series designed to provide you with tangible teaching tips that you can bring back to your classroom. I'm Bree. I'm one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined today, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Adam Barnes.
Oh,
Hey, Adam.
hi, Bree. You're so sweet to introduce me like that. Here I am, like untidy, fixing my collar, and it's okay. We'll get it figured out.
You look great. Great to see you today. Today, you all are in for a treat because we are joined by another wonderful colleague. Today we have Tracy Talmadge with us, who is not only our colleague, but a veteran math teacher and instructional coach, who has supported so many teachers across the country in their instructional practice. So welcome, Tracy.
Thank you. It's so great to
Yeah.
be here.
Yeah, good to have you. Can you share a little more about yourself just so that everyone can get to know you?
Yes. I started my teaching career in Northern California, and I spent most of my years there in a middle school, and I taught eighth grade and algebra. And I found it almost right away. It was my home. Eighth grade's my jam. My family ended up moving to Northeastern Nevada. So I taught at a middle school, more eighth grade there. And then eventually we made our way to our current destination and hopefully final destination, which is the Ann Arbor, Michigan area. And I taught at a charter school here for a year that was a 6 through 12. So I taught 6th, 7th, 8th, and algebra at that school. So that was a really great learning experience because I got to do more high school there. And I eventually transitioned out of the classroom and got into coaching. I became a math coach for a charter school district in the Michigan. It spans a wide geographic space. It's all the way from like Ann Arbor out to Clinton Township, Detroit area. And I serve 6 buildings there as a math coach. So that's a little bit about my education background.
I don't know Michigan geography, so I'm taking your word that that's a large space.
Yeah, it's like that's probably from my house, I was commuting about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on which site I went to.
That's awesome. You know, us Californians, I mean, you were California at one point too. At some point, as
Yeah.
you move east, the geography becomes a little fuzzy, right?
Yes.
So-
I don't know which way you have to do it on camera, but we have the mitten in Michigan. So we always talk to each other about, oh, I'm here, oh, there, okay. And that
Oh,
helps
I
me a
love
lot.
I'm in the upper ring finger area today. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how
that's
you do
awesome.
California. It would be like you'd have to have your whole arm.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Like to scale, right? If you want to be to scale
Yeah.
compared to Michigan. Well, I think it's super fascinating that you've taught in so many different places and have served so many different populations of students, ages of students. And I know Adam and I are particularly excited to get your perspective as an instructional coach today. So I'm curious of what inspired you to sort of make your way into instructional coaching, or how did you land in that role?
Yeah. That's a good question. I was actually facing really severe burnout in my final years of teaching. I taught during COVID in Nevada. And so our school did the whole teaching remote, asynchronous, like there was a point where I had students on camera asynchronously, and then I had students in the classroom in front of me that had to be socially distanced, and we were all masked up. So I taught during that whole time, and I was already experiencing a little bit of burnout in my career. I took a year off at one point between California and Nevada. And then post COVID, things were rough for me. And then in Michigan, I think I mentioned I did sixth, seventh, eighth, and algebra that year, and that kind of like put me over the edge. And I know a lot of teachers are taking a lot on their shoulders. And so when I decided to transition out of the classroom completely, and I was actually looking at ed tech roles, and I took like a course on it and everything. But in the midst of job searching, a math coach position came available at GEE, Global Educational Excellence is the district that I taught in, and or that I coached in. And I read the job description, and it was like a light bulb went on. And I was like, I don't have the capacity to support students anymore, but I definitely have the capacity and the empathy to support teachers. Like they're the ones who need more resources. They're the ones who need more support. So I applied right away, got along really well with the staff and the hiring manager. So that was kind of how I found my way into it. And then it was like the learning that had to go with becoming a coach. I had to learn a lot really quickly. And the good thing was that I had a really nice, so the people who were my mentors, they were like, the first thing that you need to do is just create really trusting, safe relationships with the teachers that you're going to be working with. And so I think I got like 6 months just to work on that. And so I think I learned from some of the best, because that was probably one of the best pieces of advice that I got as a new coach and that I would give to any coach.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I know some of my best coaches have always felt more like partnerships and have always really centered on relationships. So I love that you were able to get so much time to just focus on that. It's really
Yeah.
important. So, um, as a coach, just to hear a little bit more about your background, what is something that you aim to help every teacher feel confident about?
That's that's a tricky question. I think what I really want teachers to feel empowered to do is take ownership of making good choices for your students. Like I always
Mhm.
tell my teachers, you know your students, you know what they
Yeah.
can do. And so I want my teachers to feel confident that when they make an instructional decision on behalf of their students, like they get to be the experts of that. And then also, I think a secondary one would probably be I want them to be um, open communicators with their colleagues and with their admins. I think a lot of times when I work with teachers, they have a hard time advocating for themselves. They're afraid to go to their administrators and ask for help or support that they need. Right? I'm kind of like writing this burnout
Yeah.
theme again. And so I really I want to help my teachers feel like they know who they can go to, and that when they need something that they're asking for it.
Love that. Well, awesome. Well, with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and dive into today's topic, which is lesson planning. And so, Tracy, just hearing you talk about teacher burnout and just the exhaustion that can happen with the everyday tasks around teaching, uh, lesson planning is certainly something that we have to do every single day. And probably one of the most important parts of our job as teachers, but it's still challenging. And it still feels like we are under a time crunch. I don't know about you, but as I even spent more and more years in the classroom, I still was struggling to uh, find a way that felt good, where I felt like I was producing something good for my students. So Tracy, I know you and Adam both have a lot of thoughts around lesson planning. So as our guest of honor, we're going to start with you. And as an instructional coach, what is a piece of advice that you often give teachers around lesson planning?
Yeah, I think I would start with, when you get to plan with your math coach or your instructional coach, you get to plan collaboratively. And I think that that's really valuable. When I was working in my first school in Northern California, and at the beginning of my teaching career, I had a partner that we were lockstep. We planned every single lesson together. And I learned so much, and I became a much better professional learning and growing alongside my colleague because she was just like her rigor, like her expectations of herself were so high. I really learned from her. And I think she learned from me too, because I'm like the idea person. I'm always like, wait, I've been reading about growth mindset. Like, I want to try one of these tasks. And what, oh, let's talk about standards-based grading. I think the year, the year that I made her do standards-based grading with me, I think is the year our friendship really got put to the test. But so I would always say, like, when you can plan collaboratively, it's just so much more enjoyable. And so when you're planning with your coach, like when I'm getting to kind of like trick out a lesson with a teacher, a question that I always ask is, if we've got a really good lesson in front of us, we've got a really good task, if we're doing it right, we know that there's going to be a point in the lesson where our students really struggle, and we want them to struggle productively, not unproductively. And so when we're planning together, I always ask, where do you think the students are going to struggle? Like, which problem is it going to be on, or which part of the task? And then what are some of the things that you know that they're going to struggle on? And teachers are so good at that. Like, they know exactly, like, oh, they're going to flip the X and Y coordinates around. They're going to have, X on top versus Y. Like, they're going to write it backwards this way. They're very good at anticipating where the students are going to have some misconceptions, because they know their students so well. And so then I ask, what are the strategies that we want to plan for? So we know that they're going to get into that spot where they start struggling. What do we want to do? How are we going to address that? And it's really fun, like the different ideas that teachers come up with. Like, some of them are going to want to talk about, well, maybe I can have some questions ready, or maybe this is a place where I'm going to do like, I pull everybody together and we're going to do like a little mini teaching piece, so that I can get them through that stuck point, and then they can go back to their groups. Sometimes they'll use like, oh, well, I'll have them swap groups, or I'll have them do a discourse strategy. So to highlight, when you're planning with somebody else, you'll both have more ideas of how you can get them through that productive struggle. So yeah, those are some of the things that I focus on when I get to plan with teachers. And that I think is good for us to always ask ourselves.
Yeah, I feel like that's an underrated piece of advice, because you're right. Like, we're going to get so much more out of being able to run our ideas by someone else, but then also hearing what their vision of that lesson is, right? And might spark something in us that we didn't think about. I also wonder, just to extend it a little bit, I also wonder about, because part of the lesson planning is also after the lesson, when you reflect how that lesson went. And I always found great benefit when talking to a colleague about, hey, we did the same lesson today. What did you do? And hearing like, oh, I did this strategy and this is how it went. Oh, that's brilliant. Right. So even if you don't have time to reflect prior to facilitating a lesson, even like, again, I consider that after portion, right, that reflection about the lesson, to be part of that process as well. So that can also be really beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were talking about kind of just anticipating that struggle, that just reminded me about how at CPM, we always, a big piece of advice that we tell to first year CPM teachers is to just do the math, and do the math as a student, so that you can come in um, with those misconceptions, and plan for how to support, and have to do less sort of um, in the, like on the not on the job. What do I want to say? But like in the moment thinking, right? And decision making, right?
Mhm.
I know as a first year CPM teacher, I did not buy into that. And I wasn't doing the math. And it wasn't until I found myself in a situation where I had to do the math. Um, and that was when I taught AP calculus. And I haven't seen calculus in a few years. And I absolutely had to do the math in order I mean, there were some students who probably, like, throughout the lesson were already ahead of me in that class, like mathematically speaking. But that's when I realized, I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is such a critical part of lesson planning. And when you're really, really busy as a teacher, like, there are some days where my planning literally looked like just doing the math, identifying my goal, and coming up with a few questions. And that made a big difference, even just doing that. So I think that anticipation step is super, super important. So, yeah.
Well, both Bree, you and Tracy have both talked about a lot of these components that go into a lesson, right? Like your math goals, doing the math, what problems exactly need to get done, uh, what strategies, what questions am I going to ask? And that's a lot of components of a lesson. So, my piece of advice is to kind of bring all those together. And not the most popular piece of advice when it comes to working with teachers, but I strongly recommend, at least at the beginning, especially if you're new to a curriculum, using a lesson plan template. Now, if you utilize CPM, there's one in our resources, and you can always reference that. But a lesson plan template really allows to make sure that we've captured all of those components as we lesson plan. So, like I've done lessons where I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't plan a closure activity. Well, it's because I didn't have something to remind me that I needed a closure activity, right? And so I think having a template with all the key components, or even if you can't find a template, just listing out, okay, what are some things that I need to prepare in order to have a great lesson? Things like, what am I doing in my launch? What's my learning target? What problems are students working on? Did I do the math? Things like that. Even having that list or a checklist of things. Um, and it's not something that I think needs to be done every single day, filling out a template or, putting pen to paper and typing everything out, but it's a good way to build a habit to make sure like those key components are always included in your lesson.
Yeah,
Nice.
Adam, you're making me think. Like if I could go back to my teacher self, I I would now add in a checkbox of movement. Like as a younger, like as a teacher, way back when, I just feel like I never had my students out of their seats enough. And so now that's like the checkbox that I would, when I think about that, that's what I would go add for myself.
Love that. And so, Adam, I know you kind of just mentioned like your a little parts of your checkbox, but could you summarize like what's on your checklist?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have the
Putting you
template
on
in
the
front of me,
spot.
so you're kind of catching me off guard. Here we go.
We'll
I'm
come up
thinking
with
of,
one together right now.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of, like for me, I always wanted to identify what's the learning target. Like that's the first thing
Mhm.
because like that centers really what your lesson is going to be about. It gives you a reference point. So my launch activity should somehow lead into that learning target. That's the first kind of bookend. And then after I think about, what's my learning target? How am I going to launch students in? I'm actually jumping to the end of the lesson thinking about closure. Now that I know what the learning target is, okay, how am I going to close the lesson? And how are students and me, myself, the teacher, how are we all going to get feedback on whether students have met that learning target? So I'm thinking about launch, going to the end of the lesson, thinking about closure. Then I'm coming back to the middle and I'm thinking about, the meaty part of the lesson. So that is what problems are students doing or do I expect them to do? Did I do those problems? Have I kind of thought about where students are going to struggle? And then my favorite part is thinking about questions. I love questioning students. When I force myself to ask questions, I find myself, I'm not giving students like the answers. And so I'm getting them to continue thinking. So I'm going to have a list of questions that I might write out. There's some standard questions that I've had that we've talked about in a few prior episodes about just some standard questions that I have in lessons, but I'm also developing lessons that are tailored specifically or developing questions that are tailored specific to this lesson. And then I'm thinking about, Tracy mentioned movement. I'm thinking about what strategies, right? When am I going to implement these strategies? About how many minutes in? I'm starting to think about those things. And then the last thing, if you utilize them, I'm thinking about team roles. So what am I having my facilitator do, my recorder reporter do, things like that. So I'm listing all of those components out. I think that kind of covers like the major components. But I
Yeah.
mean, what is something that I didn't mention that may be forgotten as far as planning for?
I thought of something that I had on my checklist, and I know lots of teachers do this differently, but how am I going to give feedback to students, or where am I going to give them the opportunity to self-assess whether they've got this correct or not? So I've seen teachers circulate, and teams can just work through the whole lesson uninterrupted, and they're stamping their papers so that the students know that they've got that right. They can keep working. I've seen teachers who leave an answer key out and they ask teams to send a representative up and go check the key in between problems. Um, some teachers are they're collecting the papers at the end, but we really want to make sure that we're making opportunities for students to be able to like reflect, do I know this or not?
Yeah. Yeah. And as you say that, Tracy, that makes me think of the idea of a hinge question, which is something that I learned like more recently, which is like identifying that question in your lesson that your lesson hinges on, which is the essentially like, you've got Adam talked about knowing your math goal, where you want students to go, and then identifying a question where um, like students' responses to that question are going to give you a lot of information as to like whether or not they met that goal. So just hearing you talk about where are you going to ask for formative assessment, finding that question that you want to make sure to spend time on and also have a strategy planned for. Where if you hear a lot of confusion and your students aren't making progress, like you have um, a strategy plan for how to address that specific question. So that's something I might add to my checklist if I were going back into the classroom right now. Um, the other thing I think, just very generally, adding timestamps. Um, Depending on the lesson, there were times where my timer was just going off, like after 5 minutes, after 10 minutes, after another 10 minutes. I mean, because I needed that to keep me focused. I know that that is my weak spot, is keeping track of time in the moment. I get very distracted during the class period. So yeah, timestamps is just another thing, especially for a newer teacher. You can't overuse your timer, and yeah, and students appreciate it too. So yeah. Um, So hearing Adam talk about this checklist that you've kind of created for yourself, I think that like what you're describing is kind of a rhythm that you get into. And, you know, I was just picturing CPM's lesson template or lesson planning template that essentially has all of those pieces. And I think that what you were kind of describing was that like you weren't filling out a template every day, but you were like, that became so routine for you that you just had your rhythm of like starting with the lesson goal, jumping to the closure, going to launch, and then all those other pieces. So that kind of leads into my tip. My tip is to find a way to lesson plan that is sustainable. We have to do this every day. We know that our schedules are very much changing by the minute when we're teaching. And so we need routines to anchor us. So, couple practical ways to do that. The first thing I would do is to look at, do as much chapter planning as possible. So, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. Um, but I think that if you get a better understanding of the chapter and plan as much like high level things, like take a look at each section, understand what students are learning in sections 1, 2, and 3. Can I write out my lesson goals on a chapter level as much as possible for before getting into the daily lesson planning? I think you're setting yourself up to plan for less daily, is sort of what I'm getting at. So can you make your copies ahead of time? Um, if you're using a high quality instructional material like CPM, you have resources available to you to get to know your chapter. And I love that you brought up collaborative planning, Tracy, because I think that chapter planning is such a great place to just sit with a colleague and talk things out so that you all have an idea. Like the entire integrated one PLC has an idea of what students, you know, not just has an idea, but very much knows what students should be learning throughout the chapter. Um, a s- uh, the second piece to that would be to use the resources that are available to you. So again, a curriculum like CPM has intentionally written. We used to call them teacher notes in second edition, and now we have an even better version of teacher notes in our third edition, called the author's vision, that tells you like that guides you through the lesson and suggests strategies and gives insights to misconceptions. So again, use what's there for you. Uh, I was thinking back to times when when lesson planning felt the most challenging for me, and I felt like I was creating something every single day. And that's a lot of the time was because I went in not really understanding where students were going mathematically. So I just had to scramble and come up with something on the spot that kind of made sense to me, which is not a great way to approach lesson planning because we should be, thinking about what makes more sense to students. Um, and then I was creating a lot of resources. And then, like, when I'd go back and reteach a class, I was like, oh, I was reinventing the wheel here. This is already available to me. So start with the resources that you have.
Mm.
And I think those kind of two things, getting to know your chapter, starting with what you have, are just ways to alleviate all of the decisions that you have to make daily. And then hopefully be a little more sustainable.
Yeah, that's such good advice, Bree. Like, I know we want to go in and like create all the time, right? Like, especially those of us that have the creative spirit. But so that's such a good message. Use what's there so that you can really focus in on making what's there already really work for your students.
Yeah.
I think the other piece that I would just add on to that as well is, we only get so much time to plan as well. So the more we can find a sustainable routine, the more we can plan collaboratively and maybe even use a template again, like, or a checklist or something to keep track of. I think that just only makes us more efficient as teachers during that lesson planning time. It allows us to really focus in on making the best possible lesson. So, I would encourage teachers, yeah, like, find that rhythm that you can get in that is sustainable. But part of that is also like, how am I utilizing my planning time best? Right? Like, am I recreating a resource that's already created? Am I creating a slide deck that's unnecessary versus, I can display this image, or I can display this text on the screen rather than creating a whole slide deck for it. So it's those little things that add up, and hopefully, limit the chances of burnout, right? So we don't have another, like a teacher feeling what Tracy felt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Adam and Tracy, I think those are really, really solid tips. Adam, you want to summarize our tips for the day?
All right, I'm going to do it. Time for our summary. All right. So to kind of wrap this episode up about lesson planning. So Tracy talked about finding opportunities to plan collaboratively and just utilizing your colleagues and maybe others on site, or maybe not on site, just friends who might be in education, but utilizing opportunities to collaborate with others and find ways to expand on your lesson planning. I talked about utilizing some sort of template or checklist just as a way to make sure that we're keeping track of all the main components that we want to include in our lesson plan. And then Bree talked about finding a sustainable process and getting in that rhythm, right? Finding a way to lesson plan that's not going to be overwhelming for you and is something that you can continue throughout an entire school year. How did I do?
Good.
Excellent.
I'm always
Yeah.
like, did I get everybody? Did we do it? Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I will echo what Bree said, Tracy. We're just so thankful that you were able to join us today and share your wisdom. And we hope to have you on a future episode as well.
Oh yeah, this was so fun, you guys. I mean, like, we don't get enough time on the PL team to like really dig into things like this, and I love having I love having conversations about stuff like this with PL team members because we just like all get it at such a level. It's such good conversation. So thank you for inviting me. I hope I get to do more with you as well.
Yeah. Super appreciated, Tracy. It's really cool to hear your insights and your perspectives. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Want to close this out, Adam?
Yep. Well, again, we want to thank you for joining us on this episode. Don't forget to check out our channel and see if there are other episodes that might catch your fancy. We just finished a mini series with our colleague Joel about different modes of instruction, like how students are grouped. So I think that would be a great series to go ahead and check out. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, leave some suggestions down below. What are some of your go-to lesson planning strategies? And we'd love to hear from you and keep this conversation going.
See you next
And
time.
with that, we'll see you on the next one.